Arsenal deserve to win the game, and they are set up superbly as a defensive unit, but, everyone's got to stay humble.
Arsenal served up Manchester City a huge slice of Fray Bentos's humble range at Manchester City with 3 goals in the last half an hour as they smashed the champions by 5-1. I'm Will Pugh. We're back in the Tactics Exposed studio with Sunsport tactical guru Dean Scoggins. Dino, what an epic at the Emirates. You, as usual, have got 5 tactical points that fans may or may not have noticed from you.
Yeah, let's get ready to humble, hey? It's the double press from Mikel Arteta, so very, very organised, not just once but twice. Secondly, it's 11v9, so there were 2 players non-existent, and we'll show why. 6 in the City, 6 very, very organised for Arsenal, and 6 all over the place for Man City. Number 4 is Surprise Partey. Now, there's a couple of things we noticed here that you may not have seen, and then we cannot go through this without doing a Lewis-Skelly, and it smiles Lewis-Skelly and that wonderful smile at the Emirates.
Dino, I will just say, we've got a few compliments in the comments last week for the puns, and it's like, this is Sun Sport. What on earth else do you expect?
Absolutely, that's what you're here for, guys.
Exactly,
surely.
Mate. Yeah. Look, just quickly before we get into the detail and your 5 points there, I think it's fair to say, as much as Arsenal fans are absolutely loving it this morning, that perhaps the scoreline flattered them slightly?
Yeah, I think so, but City threw it in at the end, and so, and Arsenal took full advantage. And you can't, in a Premier League game, if you go away to a big club, and, we know how difficult Arsenal are to play against, you drop that level by 5% and you get beaten. And, and look, Arsenal deserve to win the game. Maybe not by 5-1, but when a team's there for the taking, then take them.
Yeah, true. It's one of those, I think, David Raya's a good game. It could have easily, that's an easy...
It could have swung before that.
It's a 3-3 game as well as a 5-1. But, wonderful result for the Gooners up and down the land this morning. Right, point number 1, though, the double press. What have they done so well here to thwart City and put pressure on them at the back, as we saw with the very first goal, Akanji's mistake?
That's it, yeah. And we've talked before about how Arsenal set up, yeah? So we talk about how they set up in a 4-4-2 out of possession.
Yep.
When Odegaard goes and joins Kai Havertz, and he's the conductor, he's the, he orchestrates the press. But what was different about this was it was a trap. Okay, so first of all, Odegaard and Havertz go towards the ball, but they weren't a lot of the time, especially early on, going gung-ho to go and get the ball.
It's not Jurgen Klopp.
No. What they're trying to do is force Man City into an area. And we're actually going to show this on the screen here, where Havertz and Odegaard are sort of going towards an area. And what Odegaard is doing is actually blocking 2 players. Exactly, yeah. And Odegaard there is blocking 2 players. So you can't play the ball into their feet. They are forcing the ball one of 2 ways. Either to Gvardiol on the left, and he's saying, I don't want it. He's pointing in the opposite direction, but then into Akanji. And so the press is a half press to begin with, and then the double press is as soon as Stones plays that pass.
Yep.
And then as soon as he plays that pass, you've got Martinelli, Rice and Trossard in a 3-man line ready to go at the ball.
So they're the 3 you can see
exactly, exactly there. So whichever one player that Manchester City pass it to, that is who they're going to hit.
Yep.
So they're not trying to win it. Look, if City gave them the ball in those 2, they're going to tap it in the empty net. But they're not actually trying to win it with the first press. It's the double press where they're going to try and win the ball afterwards. And look, we've got 2 minutes on the clock, and they've done it already. And actually, they did it just before that as well, and Ortega sliced one out of play. And Thomas Partey's backing the play up, and they leave players out wide because they trust each other to race back when they need to. But yeah, I bet they were sat there on the bench and the analysts in the stand thinking, we cannot believe how well it's worked so early against Manchester City. It was, we're going to target Akanji, and we're going to hope that Gvardiol plays in a deeper position, and we'll target him in that area as well. Because City do get a bit complacent on the ball at times because they've been so good at it for so long. But yeah, targeted Akanji, don't go once, go twice. Genius.
I'm surprised we didn't see Arsenal's analysts or their pressing coach out in the technical area. Nicolas Hover sit down.
Push the set piece.
Yeah, exactly. Hover sitting there just like this, just sulking. Look, with that, as you've mentioned there, Dino, is it Is that what I was seeing then when I was watching the game? And I'm thinking, City look, I know they haven't been great and they haven't been themselves this season anyway, but I was like, they look uncharacteristically jittery at the back.
It was indecisive.
Is that what it was?
It's indecisive, yeah, and that's where it's so clever. And it happened again, obviously, with the horrible chance that Havertz missed, where it was Rice who was the one that was herring on the double press. You have to score, yeah. But that was exactly it again, and it's almost let them have the first pass.
Yeah.
And because City are normally under pressure on the first pass, it's almost a bit like, oh, where are they sitting in front of us? And the setup was so perfect, so well orchestrated. And again, Havertz and Odegaard and even Partey behind are all in sync. And so at one stage, Odegaard is going, wait. And then when the pass is played, go, like that. And it's just brilliant, you know, and they are set up superbly as a defensive unit. And so they haven't got the quickest forwards. So Havertz and Odegaard are not the pace. You know, where their pace is Trossard, Martinelli and Rice are probably quicker than those two front men. And so that's where the press came from, the second press. So, yeah, very impressive.
Right, Dean, that does make sense to me because I'm looking, going, it just seemed weird. And even when the Akanji one, he makes a touch and I'm like, I've seen City do that plenty of times before, and it was sort of strange to see them under so much pressure when they're so normally used to playing out nicely from the back. But look, point number 2, 11v9. I'm assuming this is sort of part of the same thing, and Arsenal's set up without the ball.
Yeah, and basically what they did, and they did this not just at the beginning, but throughout the whole game, they decided that there were 2 Manchester City players who weren't a threat to them. So we'll just let them have the ball. And that was obviously Matheus Nunes, who was sort of just standing on the right wing, and when the ball came back to him, he just passed it backwards, did nothing. So that was the correct decision from Arteta.
So you really feel, Dean.
Yeah, I mean, he's not a right back, let's be honest. He's not a right back. And the whole setup of Man City was sort of weighted. And Arsenal and Lewis-Skelly, who we'll come back to later, knew that when that crossfield ball comes to Nunes, he's got so much time to sort of go out there and half block the space.
Yeah.
But Nunes is never going to beat him up the outside. So it was like a redundant player. And so that's 11v10. And to get to 11v9, Man City, after Akanji's mess up at the beginning, they just said, well, just let Akanji have the ball. So when they do get the ball to Akanji higher up the field, not, you know, when it's after the press, when it's somewhere in midfield or it's a throw-in or they reset up and City win the ball back, they go 11v9 and just let Nunes and Akanji have the space and the ball and go, you two aren't going to hurt us.
Yeah.
All the players that are going to hurt us, Foden, who had a poor afternoon, Bernardo Silva, who sort of was not really involved enough, and obviously Haaland, who barely touched the ball. That was because Arsenal had those areas heavily weighted in their favour because there was 2 players who just didn't do anything in attack. And I thought Pep was quite slow to make a change there. I was actually asking for De Bruyne to come on at right back. That was, you know, because you remember late Liverpool with Gerrard. Sometimes Gerrard would move into that right back position because they dominated midfield, and then that unbelievable cross that he could have. Not that he was playing right back, but he would drift into that position. And when City were getting, I mean, Nunes was getting so much of the ball unmarked, all the touches he had down that right-hand side, and there was zero, he didn't create a chance. Did not, you know, there was only one occasion where actually it was Savinho who sort of came over and thought, I've had enough of this, and took the ball off him, and that's where they created Haaland's goal from, really, because it was just, well, he's all right over there. So, 11v9.
So, Dino, is that, I think it feels like it highlights what you've been saying a lot of the time this season about how important, particularly when teams are trying to create overloads, how important literally every single one of the players on the pitch is, because to build these overloads, that's why they invert fullbacks, because it can overload and commit an extra player in midfield, then you leave the space. Also, with that, what you've mentioned there, 11v9, so it's less Arsenal doing something to eliminate players out the game. You think, unfortunately, City just didn't have 11 players who were scaring Arsenal enough, so they felt, actually, we'll sort of defend against the overload by just letting you do whatever because you're harmless.
Yeah, absolutely. And Trossard and Havertz and Martinelli are such hard-working forward players that when they're without possession, they come back into a more narrow space to flood that City midfield. And look, Martinelli, I think, doesn't get enough credit because he works so hard. And, you know, they've switched him over. Remember, this was a 5-1 Arsenal win against Manchester City without Bukayo Saka as well. So, you know, all credit to Arsenal doesn't get mentioned when you win a a game like that. But Saka does it as well. But Martinelli is just a fantastically hard worker. And the number of times that Martinelli, Havertz and Trossard came back to get a little toe in. But part of that is because on that left-hand side of Arsenal's, Man City's right, they let Núñez have it over there, which meant that Trossard could come back in and protect his midfield even more. So, yeah, I think they identified it pre-game. I think there was you can't, against a team like Man City, just expect to dominate every area of the field.
Yeah.
You have to concede somewhere.
Yeah, choose your concessions.
Yeah, and that is where they decided that's what we're going to do. And you could see it from Odegaard and Havertz, where it was okay when it went that way. John Stones is a much better ball player than Akanji, so let's make sure Stones can't drive into midfield, and we'll let Akanji just have it in this halfway line, inside right position, where if he hits a diagonal, Gabriel's going to win it.
Yeah, or assume it's one of them. You're just playing a numbers game, really, where you go, look, if we let John Stones drive into midfield 10 times, 8 of his passes are going to find the target.
Yes.
If we let Akanji do it, only 5. So we just
and the numbers game is 11v9, and they won it very, very well.
Incremental gains. Another numbers game here, Dino. 6 and the City.
Another
very,
pun,
very clever
Ferrari.
indeed.
Yeah, and there's two sides to it here. There's one on the Arsenal side and one on the City side. So I want to just start with the City side again. And look, I know I'm going to had a go at for saying that Pep Guardiola knows much more about football than me. And of course he does. Of course he's a genius. But in this, like last week, we were full of praise for their new setup with Marmoush, okay? They were brilliant. And if you haven't seen that episode, go back and watch it because it's really exciting to see how Marmoush could fit into the City team. It didn't work in this game. And I think that's because that they had 6 attackers, City, and they didn't really have a setup like Arsenal did. So there was the loads and loads of times in the game, and we'll show a couple of grabs of it, where City had sort of 3 at the back, with it was Gvardiol dropping in because Núñez is occupying that right-hand side area of the field.
Standing out
Yeah,
there.
standing out there, exactly. You're standing out on that right wing, and then you've got sort of, 3 at the back, which I think was a big problem for Gvardiol, because Gvardiol's been one of their best attacking players. He's the highest scoring defender in the Premier League, and he barely crossed the halfway line because he was tasked with coming in to make a 3, and then that's because they had Savinho hugging the touchline on the left. So they had Savinho one side and Núñez the other. And then that sort of took away Marmoush's space. And there was 2 or 3 times where Marmoush went to run and they didn't play the ball over the top. Maybe because they didn't fancy him against Saliba or whatever that is. But there were occasions where City were not in this sort of 2-3-5 shape that we talk about where teams like to attack. They were in like, they were like in a 3-6 formation with Stones sat behind it and then obviously the goalkeeper. So it was very, very
confusing.
Exactly. And Foden, who, as I say, didn't have a great afternoon, but it wasn't necessarily his fault. There was no space in there. And Kovacic sort of had lots of the ball going backwards and sideways. They had 3 players in deep positions and 6 players sort of nowhere really, so it wasn't good from City.
Is there anything that Arsenal were doing there, or do you think that's more of a, because it doesn't sound like, I mean, very, very humble of you to suggest that Pep Guardiola might have a slightly more tactical brain than you.
Just a bit, yeah.
But he doesn't strike us as the sort of manager, as we've seen over the last decade, basically, who would go into a game and just go, just you lot line up in a straight line, all 6 of them.
And I think that they were too slow to make an in-game change. I think they were a midfielder light. Gundogan was not playing, and so that midfield 3 that we talked about in the earlier episode wasn't there.
Yeah.
And it meant that Núñez, in the previous game against Chelsea, they had Núñez on one wing and Gvardiol on the other and stretched the game right out sideways. And look, against Arsenal at the Emirates, it's maybe a more defensive decision to make for Gvardiol not to go. But what that then meant is that the Foden and Marmoush getting close to Haaland didn't happen. And when they did,
which
it
is
was
what
crowded in there.
In the Chelsea game.
Exactly. That attacking triangle just wasn't there.
Yeah.
And it's not just about going forwards. If you have a midfield 3 that are solid, and your fullbacks split out wide, you stretch the pitch out that way. And so just to go on to the other 6, we'll show Arsenal here, and Arsenal's setup is unbelievable. You could, if you imagine the 6 dots on a dice, Arsenal are in that 6, in the middle of the
vertically
field.
up the pitch.
Yeah, and so they've got the 2 centre-backs, the 2 midfielders and the 2 attackers. And you could just draw, we'll show it, we'll draw a square around them or a light rectangle around them. And you then see the City players within that. So if a City player comes into their zone, Arsenal win it. If a City player goes out of their zone, it's not dangerous in there. We don't mind. We'll make sure we defend this bit. And City never managed to stretch the game out wide. And that's why, really, they didn't create... I mean, all right, Raya made a couple of good saves and Haaland scored a good goal, but they just didn't create enough.
I will say that. I think for City fans watching, going, come on, I know it was a bad collapse in the last half an hour, particularly the latter stages, which is what made the scoreline what it was. And that's why I started with, did it flatter Arsenal a bit? But David Raya makes 1 probably world-class save, 2 or 3 elite level saves. And if they go in at the time of the game it's a totally different game.
It is, but they were getting beaten tactically. So they're good players. So they're going to...
even in the first hour?
Yes, even in the first hour, they're getting beaten tactically. And I just don't think they were quick enough to change it. Mate, look, they believed in their plan, and if those goals had gone in, then we might be having a different conversation. But even at that stage, I think they were getting beaten in a numbers game in that midfield area.
Right, surprise Partey, Dino. Thomas Partey scored a rare goal for Arsenal, albeit an absolute whopper of a deflection. Talk to me.
Yeah, and so there were 2 things here. First of all, let's go back to that Chelsea episode again with Man City. They were missing Ederson.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was a really big thing because the direct balls from Ortega just aren't good enough. He's just not as good on the ball as Ederson is, and he doesn't hit the ball with that, ferocious pace into Haaland's feet. But Arsenal had a plan, and it was Thomas Partey. And Thomas Partey, it sounds simple, right? Just stand in front of Haaland.
Yeah.
So that just blocks off that direct ball,
Just stop the best
that Gabriel is going to win the ball above him or, at least very much compete with him, but stop the ball going into his feet. And we've talked about before, semicircle in front of an attacker, the midfielder just covers that around in front of him. It goes out that way, he shifts around, stops the ball coming into his feet. Yeah. And Thomas Partey very quietly had a great game. Declan Rice was the standout performer in midfield with the touches, the driving runs and everything going forward. But Thomas Partey did that amazing job. But the goal is the interesting one. He hides behind the ref. So Phil Foden gets the ball, goes to play the ball into midfield, and Thomas Partey is hiding behind the referee because he's not in that line of sight that Foden... bear in mind, at this level of football, you get 1 look.
Yeah.
And I talk to my boys when I'm training our boys level about Phil Foden head, where you talk about them looking around all the time. Make sure you're scanning, make sure you're looking around. And Foden's so good at it, he takes 1 look, there's nobody in midfield, he goes to play the ball into Marmoush, and Thomas Partey, surprise, comes out from behind where the referee is, nicks the ball, and all right, gets a lucky deflection. But it's again, because Arsenal are set up so well, they actually get caught by Foden and end up scoring a goal from it because they've got another midfielder who's covering the other guys and comes out and takes the ball. So fair play, another little sort of minute detail in a game that goes your way and you score a goal.
Yeah, well, that's what we talk about, isn't it? Incremental gains, basically. The players talk about that. And it's these little fine margins in football. That is the ultimate cliche. I hate doing things like that. Smiles Lewis-Skelly is point number 5. Dino, no need really to ask you why. Just quickly, what do you make of the old...
let's not spend 20 minutes.
Like it,
Arteta didn't like it, and let's not spend 20 minutes explaining irony. But but yeah, look, they won the game. They deserve to celebrate, and it just could get thrown back at you later in the season if you don't do it.
That.
No, I don't. You win, celebrate.
Absolutely,
you win, celebrate, and it's fun, right? That's what we're talking about.
Haaland threw a ball at Gabriel's head last
absolutely,
time.
And Haaland set himself up for this in the first game.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But anyway, talk to me about Lewis-Skelly tactically.
Yeah, his performance again was just unbelievably good. We've debated on previous shows about whether he's going to end up being a fullback or a midfield player.
It's not the old Trent Alexander-Arnold side.
It could be.
It's okay to be a fullback. Yeah. Just be a fullback.
Yeah, but do you know what? Again, a bit like Trent, he is playing 2 positions in 1. Yeah. And and again, that's another thing about leaving Núñez on the wing and just going, I'm not bothered about you because I'll beat you for pace up the outside. But but he's physical and quick in defensive positions. But then it's his tactical awareness of when to go in midfield. Like, I think that when we talk about Chelsea and that box midfield they create by inverting a fullback, right? And previous years when Pep did it and when Rico Lewis was doing it earlier in the season, and then you look at other teams like Spurs who just send their fullbacks into those positions, it's robotic.
Yeah.
So this is what we're going to do in those situations. Yeah. Where Lewis-Skelly is miles better than those is that he understands when to go. So he looks and scans and he thinks, no, it's all right. We've got 2v2 in midfield there. We're okay.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, no, hang on, I need to go in. Or if I win it here, Trossard's going the other way. I can play him the ball. I can take a player with me. Yeah. So it's not just when he's on the ball he's so good. It's when he's off it. And he actually scores his goal from a moment when I don't think he actually wanted the ball. Yeah, he went into a really good area and Matheus Nunes didn't go with him. He's your man, mate. I know he hasn't been marking you because he's not worried about you, but that doesn't mean you can't do your job going the other way. You know, another reason why Nunes dropped a solid 2 out of 10 performance.
You've really got it in for Nunes.
I just don't. I don't know why. Yeah, it was irritating me all afternoon. But like, he goes into an area and remember we talked about in a previous episode again Arsenal's musical chairs, where they go and rotate those players on that side with Rice and Martinelli or Trossard. And they all know it doesn't matter who's in that position as long as somebody is, because that's the attacking setup that Arteta wants it to be.
Not dissimilar to the wheels of chaos we talked about with Ange Postecoglou.
Yeah, a little bit just the same. Yeah, but as Tottenham do it by runners from deep, as they did for one of the goals at the weekend. Whereas Arsenal, it's more ball, play, move. So it's like, that's why I described it as musical chairs before. But Myles Lewis-Skelly goes into this position and then Rice looks at him and thinks, oh, actually, he's the one to receive the ball. Yeah. And it's a great back foot turn. And then from there, look, I think the goalkeeper could do a little bit better. But again, it's tactical awareness from Lewis-Skelly where he thinks, I'll go into an area because that's going to cause somebody else a problem. And he's so good on the ball that then he does the rest after that. And it was wonderful. He is some player. He is, look, it was, as one of my Arsenal friends said, it was Haaland 1 and Haaland 2.
Just when I thought as well that Trent Alexander-Arnold and his potential move to Real Madrid might leave you actually having to call players by their surnames. We've got another Englishman with a double-barrel surname fullback, so I can't wait for you to start calling him Miles.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure I can do that. Yeah.
Where does it leave the title race, very briefly, to wrap up?
Look, they're in it. But it goes down to that Liverpool away at Everton a week on Wednesday,
which is their game in hand.
Which is their game in hand. And if it's 9 points, it's a lot to go. But they go to Anfield. Liverpool have got to play City as well, so maybe City will still have a stay in the title race. It's not over yet, but everyone's got to stay humble.